So the question is, if you're looking at the inflection, or basically, right, an inflection is a reversal point, right? So an inflection is a change in direction. So when it comes to charting, the only changes in direction is going up to down or down to up, right? So on a chart, there is no left to right, change in direction on your indicators. Indicators either go up or they go down. So the inflection solver, right, is looking at whether indicators are reversing up or reversing down. So let's say you're looking at the inflection of, and so in this example, it's the MFI indicator. And so what I have in these squares here are, sorry, hold on, let me, there we go, let's just turn that off, there we go. So in these squares here, I've circled them to kind of point out areas that look like they're kind of flat, or at least, sloping up slightly, right? There does not look like there would be any inflections on this MFI indicator, right? However, if you expand this up, you will see that actually there are little tiny, micro inflections in here. So technically speaking, yeah, there are inflections in here, but of course, one of the problems with charts is things get squished, right? Things get squished. So if you squish your indicator, right, it's going to look nice and smooth. But in fact, if we, let's change this out. Let's put the MFI indicator in here. And where is it? There we go, MFI. And of course, to build an example here, I'm using a 100 period to try and help get some of these flat areas. And if we turn that on, right, we can in fact see that, wow, there's a lot of inflection points, where, in these circled areas here, but they look kind of flat. So the question is there a way to set kind of like a minimum and maximum, inflection amount with the inflection solver, similar to the slope solver, right? So if you're familiar with the slope solver, right, it has this maximum slope and minimum slope, right? So you can make sure that your indicator is sloping up by some kind of minimum amount, right? So your indicator has some kind of minimum angle, so to speak, right? Using the min and max slope there. So the question was, wow, is there a way to use that concept on the inflection solver here, right? And of course, if we look at the settings, we can see no, the inflection solver doesn't have a minimum or maximum, right? Basically, if your indicator is reversing direction, it's reversing direction. So that's the question. And so I'm going to illustrate two possible solutions to minimize these little micro inflection points here, so you can smooth out the indicator and your inflection solver doesn't mark all these inflection points in here. Kind of take out the smaller ones like so. All right. So let's see here. Yeah, I will need both of these solvers here. All right. And then before I get started, the first thing that we need to do is create a file name for today's workshop, right? So we can see that the file name here is blank up top here. So let's hit the change button. File name, and I'll put in today's date, the 17th already. So next, let's start working on the logic board here. So let's create a new logic template. And what should we call this? All right, so I'll call this minimizing indicator inflections there. All right, and I had already created a inflection solver and slope solver. So let me move those over, put those on the logic board. There we go. All right. So let's start naming these. So this is the MFI 100 inflection. And let's see the slope solver. All right, so this will be the slope of the MFI indicator. All right, so I'm going to use the slope solver later here. So now my first example, let's just connect that in. There we go. Connect that in. I've got basically, I've got two ways that we can use to minimize, all this kind of choppiness, within the indicator to, minimize or prevent all of these inflection points. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to smooth out the indicator, right? Smooth out the indicator here. So let's do this on the chart first. We'll create a visual representation on the chart first. And take the SMA, and I'm going to take basically a 2-period SMA for minimum amounts. I'm going to start off with a minimum amount of smoothing here. And what I'm going to do is change the input series of my SMA to that MFI indicator. So let's go to the indicators here. And there we go. Select the MFI and remember to change the period to 100. Call it good. And I want to make sure that my SMA is on the same panel as the MFI indicator. So let's change our panel to what panel is it on? It's on panel 2, I believe. Click OK. There we go. All right. So now we can see the SMA on top of the MFI. Yeah, so already we can see that the smoothing out the MFI, right, with a 2-period SMA it looks like it's done a really good job of reducing these inflections here. Yeah. All right. So let's do the same thing in BloodHound, right? So how do we use the SMA indicator to smooth out the MFI, right, inside your solver here? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the solvers tab, and I'm going to make a copy of this inflection solver here. And this will be the SMA 2, right, of the MFI 100 indicator. All right, and find the inflection. So the way we do that is we go into the indicator list again here, right? And we're gonna have to remove the MFI indicator. And the first thing we want to add is the SMA. There you go. So there's our SMA, and let's make it a 2-period. All right. So next, you want to make sure that we have the SMA selected, and then we're going to scroll up to the MFI indicator, and this time do a single click, right? Just one click. Do not double click. So one click so that it's highlighted, and then we can hit the nested input button, right? So click the nested input button, and there we go. So we can see the MFI is now fed into the SMA, right? Exactly the same thing that I just did on the chart here. So, and the final step here is let's change the MFI to a 100 period there. All right, and there we go. So now if we look at this, we can see the MFI is fed into the SMA, just like so. There. So there is our new inflection solver with the MFI smoothed out using an SMA 2-period. And so now let's go to the logic board and go to our existing nodes and put that new solver on the board there. There we go. So now if we take a look at that, there. So we can see we've managed to reduce, right, the inflections here. So there still are 2 inflections there, but if we look at the original, there's quite a few more inflections in there than the smoothed out version. So we can see it's not perfect. So, you might want to experiment with other moving averages. So maybe you need a 3-period SMA, or maybe you might need a 3-period EMA, right? So the EMA does less smoothing. It's right. The EMA is faster reacting, so the smoothing is less. So if you want to use the EMA, you would need a higher period EMA to get the same smoothing as the SMA. But also maybe let's see, maybe the HMA. Personally, I kind of like how the HMA looks on price. There we go, the HMA. So that's got really nice smoothing effect on it. So maybe the HMA of the FMA, or the HMA of whatever kind of momentum indicator, that you're wanting to smooth out, the HMA smoothing of it. Never really done this, so I don't know what kind of period you'd want for the HMA, but you just kind of have to play around with it on your chart, find a moving average that you like, and then just incorporate that into your BloodHound solver, and there you go, right? So that's one way, that you can smooth things out. And let's see, let's move that up. And then the second way is I'm going to combine the inflection solver with a slope solver as well. So potentially you could use the slope solver to kind of cut out some of these inflections here as well. All right. Let's see, actually first let me there. I want to fade the SMA kind of back into the background here. So there we go. Let's make that a little dimmer. And let me make the MFI a little brighter. There we go. Let's make it cyan. There. All right. So if I'm going to use the SMA, the first thing I need to do is, adjust the SMA, tune it to cut out these inflection points here. So the MFI, it runs in its own subpanel, right? So it has its own scaling. So if you're using something like the MACD, the stochastics, the CCI, this MFI that run in their own subpanel, then when you're using the slope amount here, you don't want to use ticks, right? Because, there's no such thing as a tick value for an indicator that has its own scaling, right? A tick value only applies to price. So what you want to do is you want to change your measurement unit from ticks to points, right? So basically this MFI, these values here going from 1 to 2, 4 to 5, those are point values for your indicator. So let's change the measurement units from ticks to points. And when we start using points, we're going to get expected results. All right, so first thing, let's see here. Let me try a 1-point angle. Let's see what happens here. And, well, 1 point is way too much. So there's no output anymore. So let's try half a point. 0.05, half a point. And well, there we go. We're starting to get some results. So we can see, right, that indicator is having to, well, maybe not so much. I mean, of course, it depends on how much you're stretching your indicator out. But if we look at it like that, it's like, well, that angle doesn't look too bad, right? But if we stretch it like this, right, it makes that angle look a lot steeper. But still, we're only getting a couple of bars with an output. So let's try reducing this a lot. So I'll go down to 0.1. Let's see what that does. There we go. So yeah, 0.1. Yeah, we're starting to see some sloping output here. But our goal is to set the minimum slope amount so that we don't get an output on these little micro inflections here, if that's even possible. So, this may not even be possible. So let's try 0.2 on here, on these outputs, and see if that works. Let's see, not quite. Yeah. But as I'm doing this, so as I'm working through this, trying to get rid of the slope output right in there, and also I'd like to get rid of the slope there, which I have done, right? This is working. However, I can see a big problem, which is, you know what? It's not working here. You would definitely expect to see an inflection on these points here, right? But there's no output. There's no long output. So I can already tell that basically, so if I squish the indicator down here, right, you would definitely expect to see an inflection right there and right there. However, the slope solver is not giving an output. So the slope solver would remove these inflection points, which definitely would not work here. So I can tell already that for this particular indicator, in this situation, the slope solver is actually not going to solve my problem, right? It's not, it's just not going to work here. Actually, let's try this. I'll try and go down to 0.15 here and see if that does anything. Oh, sorry guys. I didn't change the indicator here. I'm still looking at the SMA 14. So, gee whiz. Okay, no wonder things aren't working out. All right. So let's get the MFI 100 period in there. All right, so easy mistake. Sometimes if you just get ahead of yourself, it's easy to make these mistakes. All right. So there we go. So now, so we're getting some output from the slope solver. And so again, let me try and try and increase the slope amount here. My goal is to remove, right, any kind of slope in these little micro, inflection areas, but keep the slope, on these broader, bigger inflection points, if this is going to work out. So there, we'll kind of mark them with the triangle on the areas where I want to get rid of the slope. So let's see. All right, need to go a little higher, so I'm just going to slowly increment the maximum and minimum slope here until I get rid of my slope outputs where these triangles are. There. All right. I think that works. So 0.45. Yeah, maybe I'll just round this off to 0.5. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, pretty much the same there. So when I'm looking at this, right, we still have the long output from the slope, right? So when the MFI indicator is, when it's pointing upward, right, we're getting a long output from the slope solver as it's pointing upward. But remember, when when we look at our indicator, right, overall, it looks like the MFI has a gradual sloping upwards, right? And so most notably, we want to get rid of the short output of the inflection solver. That's probably going to be the primary goal, if you're looking at the inflection of an indicator and it's sloping upwards, right? So again, we're looking at the inflection of the indicator. So now if we look at the slope of the indicator, right? So if I get rid of the short output, basically the sloping down, that's probably going to be good enough, right? We probably don't need to worry about getting rid of the long outputs of the slopes of the sloping up here in these areas. So let's just take that for now. And the next thing we need is an AND node. So if we combine these two together, we can basically, what we're doing is we're using the slope of the indicator to filter out, remove some of these inflections, right, of the inflection solver. And so now, let's take a look at this, right? So now if we look at this, right, it looks, let's kind of clean this up a little bit. There, so from a visual standpoint, this probably looks more appealing, right? So this larger inflection over here, those inflection points are identified, great. These inflection points that are easy to see, when your indicator is squished like this, those are all showing up. This one, those two. But back in here, we are getting an inflection up. And my guess, in your system, that this is probably okay, right? So we had an inflection, a long inflection back here, and then we had a second long inflection over here. And that's probably okay for the most part. Again, it all depends on the details, on what you need, from the inflection of your indicator. But this is probably going to work for most system ideas here. So as we can see, it's not perfect, but it is an alternate solution to minimizing, all of these inflection points here, right? So you could either do this or, so like, again, here's the original, right? So we can see the original has a lot of inflection points, and here is our filtered inflections using a slope solver, right? So yeah, you'll just have to experiment as to what method, works best with your idea. Do you want to use some kind of moving average and smooth out your indicator, or do you want to use a slope solver to filter out some of the inflection points, right? So if we look at this, we can actually see there's a big difference here. So the smoothing, didn't quite remove all that many. The slope solvers seem to work a little better, right? So if we go back to the moving average here, as mentioned earlier, maybe you need to use a 3-period SMA. And there we go. So we can see a 3-period SMA definitely reduces, the number of inflections as well, right? So, all right. So anyways, that was our emailed in question for today of how do we reduce, inflections on a momentum type of indicator here.